Okay, so we're kicking off today thinking about creating a culture of courage in your team. So for these last couple of days, we've been talking really about leading yourself. And I think this is an interesting concept, the fact that we have two sides. We have to lead ourselves, and then we also need to lead our teams. So the first 2 days, we've really been looking a little bit inwards, looking at ourselves. And now we're going to start looking more outwardly towards our teams. But of course, the distinction is a bit artificial, but it's just an easy way to organise it. So we've been thinking about how to spot the warning signs of if we're not feeling very courageous. So just a quick reminder there, we've been thinking about things like listening to our language, if we're saying I can't or I'm not good enough. We're thinking about a lot about how to live with uncertainty and with fear and to still be courageous. So those are really the two strands, and in a sense those continue with our teams. So today we're going to be thinking a lot about leading your team courageously, and the first thing I'd like you to do, if you have your workbook handy, what I'd like you to do is just spend a couple of minutes looking at the very first part of that. So I'd like you to note down some of the characteristics that you think are important if you want a high performing or a high functioning team. So think about your team and what's important for you. Now this is very important that you think about your particular team, because every context is going to be a little bit different. Just to give you an idea, so as you know, I have two businesses. I have my coaching business and I also have a teaching business, a language school. So in those I have teams in both of those, but what I need in one team is not the same as another. So for example, in my teaching team, the teachers, I really need them to be very creative, to have excellent interpersonal skills, to be able to relate to the students, to sort out a lot of those kind of issues, and to be able to build rapport very, very quickly with whoever comes through the door. So that's really important for us, and it's important as between us that we communicate well. So I would say those interpersonal communication skills are very, very important, amongst other things. But then for the people who are in my team for the coaching business, it's really important that they're very independent, that they take the initiative. They have to make decisions without me because I'm not available. And so it's a very different set of characteristics. So I'd like you to think about your team and what do you need in your team to have a high functioning team. So just make a quick list. Don't think too much about it. Whatever comes to mind is probably going to be the right thing. So I guess you've probably got 2 or 3 things, maybe more, listed there. And I would like you to look at your list and then think about which of those require you to be courageous. And by that I mean, so for example, I'll give you an example for me. So for me, for the teachers I work with, for example, I need them to be very confident to communicate with our students, with our adult students, and to make decisions, to build rapport. Now for that, I need to be courageous in the sense that I need to be willing to let go of that. I need to be willing to say to them, I have absolute confidence in you and your ability to do that, and I will support you in that. So that's what I mean by being courageous, and it might look different in your situation. So have a look. Which of those require you to be courageous? And maybe if you would like to put that in the chat to just share amongst yourselves, that would be great. So alongside that, I think this is important because we really need to look at why these things are important. So yes, so we've got trust there is really important, and that requires courageous leadership. Absolutely, having trust in our staff. Great. Anyone else got anything they'd like to put in the comments? or make a note of it on your piece of paper. And as I said yesterday, in the last couple of days, these questions, I'm giving you them very quickly, so it's a little bit artificial. So do take your time and come back to them. Yes, giving honest feedback. Yes, that takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? That really is courageous leadership, because giving honest feedback, it requires great relationships for a start, and then courage to go about that in the right way. Great. I think one of the things that comes out of a lot of this is that, in fact, courageous leadership. So, for example, here we've got setting clear goals, giving honest feedback, trust. All of this means that our model of leadership needs to reflect that. So the old-fashioned model was the command and control. So we command, we tell people what to do, they get on and they do it. So that is quite an attractive model in some ways, if it works. But of course, it's quite limiting. And in terms of those higher level skills that we're now demanding from people, for most of the time, it doesn't work. And so what we're shifting towards a lot of the time is a model of consensus or collaboration. And both of those require a lot of communication, and it's messy. And that's the problem with it. To get that powerful communication, to get those relationships really working, it becomes messy. The conversations are messy because you're going to have people with different points of view. You're going to have people with different values. You're going to have people who have different feelings about transparency, for example. So it's going to be messy. Now, some people don't like the messiness, and I would say we need to embrace it. And there are going to be very few points over these 5 days where I'm going to propose one thing very definitely. But this is one. That messiness we need to embrace, because without that messiness, we don't see the nuances of human communication, of the human relationships. So we need to embrace that and be courageous about that. And in fact, in order to empower people, we have to accept that messiness is there. In order to serve people and help them to reach their potential and to eventually take over a lot of the roles that are there in the team, so that we're no longer required. That is the ultimate aim, that we work ourselves out of a job as a leader. So to do that, to empower people, to serve them, to be able to show their potential and unlock their potential. Yes, it's messy, and we need to embrace that. And that's what it is. That's being courageous. So I'm sure the big question is, which painting have I got for you today? So I have got one for you today, and let's see if you like this one. So just give me 2 seconds to share my screen with you. I hope I can. So do tell me if this appears on your screen. It's just coming. So this is a wonderful painting called The Great Wave. If someone could just give me a thumbs up, can you see that? Let me just check that I've just shared that with you. So this wonderful painting, a Japanese painting, and what's interesting is that there's some debate about the name of it, and that people felt that it was a tsunami. But in fact, apparently, I don't know, I don't speak Japanese, but apparently it just means big wave. And the reason why I've chosen this painting for you today is because I'd like you to look at the boat. Now the boat, in fact there are 2 boats, but I'd like you to look at the boat at the front there. I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but I'm just pointing out the boat here. So you've got this enormous boat, and it doesn't look particularly stable. But what I think is very interesting about it is its position. So when you look at that boat, would you say that it is about to really surf the wave? Is it surfing the waves? And do you get the impression that the waves are coming all the time? I mean, certainly for me, when I look at that, it reminds me very much of a sailing trip that I had. I learnt to sail in Southampton, which those of you who know the south of England will know that Southampton can have quite choppy water, but equally it can be very flat and beautiful. And the week when I learnt to sail, the water was indeed beautifully flat. We had sunshine all week, and by the end of the week, I have to admit, I was feeling quite smug and thinking, oh, I can do this. This is not too bad. So at the end of that week, I booked myself onto a trip from Cork in Ireland all the way up to Scotland. So going through the Irish Sea. And during that trip, I had a very different experience. And I have to say, I felt a little bit like this little boat here with these big waves coming over. It was grey. You couldn't see anything. The sea was choppy. And I have to admit, I didn't feel like we were surfing on the waves. So maybe that's why this picture speaks to me. But with your team, I would like you to think of yourselves in that boat, and that you are able to surf the waves. So those waves keep coming, but you're able to surf those. Now, if you look at that boat as well, to me, there doesn't look like there's not much of an engine there. This only works because the team inside are pulling together, are really working hard. No one's falling out as far as we can see. There's great power there, but there's also a lot of vulnerability. And I think those two sides, this is where, for me, we see courageous leadership. People who are able to have power in soft power because of the way they communicate, the way they build rapport with their team, but also they are able to be vulnerable and they're able to ask for help. So this picture for me is an interesting one for leadership. So yes, the waves are coming, and they will come, and they probably won't stop. They might lessen a little bit, but they're going to come. But the boat can surf that because they work together. The team can come together and use that power, but also be vulnerable at the same time. Okay, let's put that aside and just come in. I'd just like to say hello to Laura, who's just popped in. Hello, Laura. Thanks for joining us. So today, we're going to look at how we can foster this courage. How can we foster this courage so that we can surf those waves? And how can we show that vulnerability that we also need to do as a leader? Now, today I'm going to mention two books that I absolutely recommend to you. And the first one is called Dare to Lead, and it's by Brené Brown, who's an American, and she's written a lot of amazing books, and she's got a great podcast as well, if you're interested. And she writes a lot about this issue, about being vulnerable, but also about building very strong relationships within the team. And she talks also about courage being contagious, and I think the word contagious at the moment in the whole arena of being in the middle of COVID, the word contagious means even more to us than usual. But courage being contagious, I think, is a very hopeful phrase, and I think it is very true. So courage is contagious. So she moves on to say, if we believe that, then it must start with us as the leader. That courage must start from us. So how can we do that? We can't impose courage on a team. It doesn't work like that. But what we can do is model courage. And we can model what we talked a little bit about yesterday, that emotional agility, for example. So how do we do that? Well, we have to talk about it. We have to be transparent. We have to articulate it. So for example, I'll just give you an example around resilience. So For example, at the moment, many people are finding it difficult with COVID in many situations. Obviously, for those who are in the medical profession, it's extremely difficult. For those who are supporting the medical profession, I have a lot of friends here in Belfort who are working in logistics around pharmaceuticals. It's very difficult for them, the pharmacists, but also teachers. It's touching a huge number of people. So that resilience is really important. So how do we model that? Well, I think we need to articulate that, yes, things are tough. We're finding it tough. So you can literally say, yes, I'm finding it tough too. I'm finding this difficult. And what can we do together to make this a little bit easier? It doesn't mean that finding the solutions are any easier, but what you're doing is you're modelling that it's okay to not be okay. That's the first thing. It's okay to not be okay. It's also good to articulate it very clearly, to identify those emotions, and then also take a step back, analyse, and where do we go from there? This takes obviously a bit of practice, and it takes a bit of getting used to. But by modelling it to your team, you're really going to be helping them to put that into practice for themselves. Alongside that, obviously, you need a safe place where people can speak openly. That is about creating a culture. It's about having ground rules in a meeting. It's even as simple as just not interrupting people, allowing them to speak, setting up those guidelines. Now I know that in some workplaces that really doesn't happen at the moment, and I think that's something that we can put in place fairly easily, allowing people to speak without being interrupted. Finally, in that same block around modelling courage, it's also about finding the light. And I'm just referencing the wonderful poem that Amanda Gorman wrote for the inauguration last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry now. And when she talks about that, it's, can we find the light? It's part of our role to find the light and be the light. And I think as a leader, finding the light, being the light, finding hope, and that's also part of being a courageous leader. Related to that is always coming back to our mission, coming back to our purpose, because that's so important for people. And in terms of resilience in particular, finding our purpose, what is our mission, and keeping aligned with that, it gives people courage to continue. Now, the key question then is, when people are finding things difficult and they need to see you modelling that courage, one of the things you can do is you can ask 2 questions. Firstly, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? The second one is maybe even more interesting, and that is, what does that look like? Because what happens is that when we ask somebody, what do you need from me? And they might say, well, I need more support. But when you ask the follow-up question, what does that look like? You're asking for what are the behaviours that you need to see. So that could be so many different things. That could be, well, I'd really like you to send me an email every Friday morning to see how my week was. Or it might be, well, I'd like to have a 5-minute meeting with you every lunchtime, or whatever it is. So that behaviour, if you can get people to articulate the behaviour that they need, of course you might not be able to give it, and that's something else to negotiate. And that's where what I mean by the messiness. When we start asking, then it can be messy because maybe we can't do it. But it's a great place to start. And with a team, it works really well, because if you can agree on what that looks like, what do you need and what does that look like? Can we agree the ground rules? Yes, that's possible. No, that's not possible. It's clear. That really helps in terms of building a culture of courage, because people know they can ask, and also you know what the expectations are. You can manage those expectations really much, much better. Okay, that was I think that was a little long one there. So number 2 is all about working on mindset. So when we're wanting to be a courageous leader and build the courage in our team, the culture of courage, having a growth mindset is absolutely key. Now, I'm going to suggest another author for you here. Her name is Carol Dweck, and another American, and you can find some very good TED Talks that she's done about growth mindset. So what is it? It's simply this idea, this belief that people can change, people can evolve, people can develop, that we can learn and we can progress. So we are not fixed. So it goes against this idea, for example, that we can measure intelligence. It goes against the idea that success is perfection. Now, this is the one that is often a challenge, because for many of us, we have grown up in a system where success is a job well done, perfectly done. So if we have a growth mindset, then we define success as being progress, that we have moved forward, that we have learnt from our previous experiences. So this takes quite a shift. For that to work, we also have to embrace failure. And again, this can be quite a challenge. But again, as a team, if we have this culture that we can take failure, and instead of seeing it as failure, we can take it as feedback and then use that to progress. Now it is easier said than done. And again, it takes a lot of practice to put that in place, but it comes from you, the leader, because you set the tone. How you celebrate, which is what I'm going to come on to, is the third way, because the third way to create courage is also to really celebrate and integrate successes. But let's be careful, because if we celebrate successes as perfection, you've just undone that work on the growth mindset. So if we can celebrate success as in related to purpose and also related to progress and improvement, and how we've used previous setbacks, for example, we're putting it in a different limelight. So what does that look like? Well, the traditional thank you speech, well, I'd just like to thank so-and-so because they've done such a great job. They've achieved all their targets. Fantastic. Well done. Clap, clap, clap. So that's your typical thank you speech. And there's a place for that, definitely. And in some organizations, having those, achieving those very strict goals is going to be important. But I would suggest let's go further than that. Take it to the next stage and think about, well, what did that bring? That success, that improvement, where did it take us on our road towards our mission, our purpose? What did we get from that? Let's link it to our purpose. What can we do now that we couldn't do before? How have we developed as a team? What have we learnt about ourselves and our potential? And how's that going to help us for the next step? Now, this takes obviously more time. It takes a bit more discussion, and it's messier. The simple thank you speech is much quicker, much easier, and it might be more appropriate depending on the situation. But I would urge you to consider going that next step. Then what do I mean about integrating successes? Now, this is something actually that I would like to come back to on a personal level, because I think for leaders generally, many find this difficult for themselves. We're very programmed to look at what's wrong. Well, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. That's not good, that's not good. We're analysing what's gone wrong. What we also need to do is look back and see, well, where have we come from? And by integrating them, that's more than just acknowledging them. This is really thinking about, well, what has changed? How are we functioning in a better way? We've not just ticked things off. What has that changed fundamentally? And of course, then you can use that same approach with your team. Integrate that success by, yes, acknowledging where you've come from, and then saying, so what does that enable us to do next? So why is this important? Well, I think we're going back to something we talked about yesterday. When we start to have this mindset of looking at progress, of almost celebrating failure in a way, because we're going to learn so much from it. If we can get to that point, suddenly we start to get this kind of flow. We're in a state of that relaxed concentration where whatever happens, we know we can learn from it. We know we can move forward. Whatever happens, however big those waves are, we know that we can move forward because we've got that mindset of we will move forward. The difficulties will pass, and we will use those to grow our team and to move forward. And that to me is courageous leadership, and it's a courageous culture when we've got the courage to develop and the courage to open those limits. Quite often we have a very limited view of what we're capable of ourselves, but also our teams. This is our remit, so we don't need to go any further. Well, why not? Let's push that boundary out a little bit. What else could we do? Where else could we go? How else could we use the talents that we have in this team? Now, obviously, this also depends whereabouts you are in your organisation, how possible that is. But as senior leaders, you are often in a position to be able to influence that. So in your workbook, I've mentioned that I have one top tip for you, but actually I've got 3. So there you are, a bonus. So my first top tip is that to be a leader who builds this culture of courage, I would suggest that you become a leader who coaches. Partly because I think that coaching can very much change people's lives, but it's also a skill that you can learn. You can learn the basics of coaching really quite simply and quickly. So there are just basically, if you stick to very basic coaching conversation, you need to find what the vision is, what are the goals. Secondly, what are the options? Thirdly, how can you solve the problem more generally? What's going to be practical? And fourthly, accountability. When is it going to be done? And who's going to check up on it? So those are the 4 steps that you can apply immediately to your team. And that starts to build a culture of courage, because you're giving people, you're empowering them to think of solutions, to move forward, and maybe think of options that you haven't thought of. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is taking imperfect action. So this is about putting into place this idea of a growth mindset. And imperfect action is a wonderful thing. And once you've embraced it, you'll never look back. Because if you can put things into place that are not perfect, you make so much progress. Because if you wait for things to be perfect, it's very slow. And who says it's perfect anyway? Again, we come back to this idea of the convex mirror that we looked at yesterday. My idea of perfection is probably not going to be your idea of perfection. So let's go with something. Let's put together what we want to do. And is it good enough? If it's good enough, then let's try it. Obviously, given the circumstances you'll have to adapt it to your situation. So embracing failure is really your number 1 strategy, strangely enough. So with imperfect action, there will be problems. They will be messy. But embracing that and using that to grow and develop as a team, you build courage, you build that muscle altogether. Okay, so your homework. Very quickly, I would like you to have a think about what imperfect action are you going to take this week to nurture a culture of courage in your team? What kind of imperfect action are you going to take this week? So it might be, for example, I've heard a lot talking to different people that people are saying things like, well, we're not making any decisions now because we're waiting for the situation to change. Now, unfortunately, we don't know how long the situation is going to last. And secondly, can we afford to wait? Now, there is this, we can wait and wait, but again, this shifting from crisis into thriving in difficult times is something that I've spoken a lot about recently, and I really believe that it is exactly this kind of example where we need imperfect action. We don't know the outcome. We don't know what the future holds for the next few weeks, the next few months. We don't know. But if we wait before we put into place perhaps things that could very much help, for example, the children in our school or whatever, then this is our opportunity to use imperfect action. Now, by that, I don't mean taking unnecessary risks. It has to be calculated risks, but let's not wait for everything to be perfect all of the time. So that's the program for today. We're going to say goodbye to Facebook now because we're going to continue and have a discussion all together here. So just give me 2 seconds to say goodbye to Facebook. Bye-bye, Facebook. Okay.